Hello and welcome to episode 30 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and we got lots of questions here, ranging from very easy to very difficult, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. And if you have any questions you want me to answer, or at least try to answer, especially if they have anything to do with Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism or Burmese Buddhism or Buddhist monasticism or meditation, Buddhist practices, anything like that, anything about me personally, feel free to ask in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer. And I make no guarantees that I will answer it really well, possibly not to your satisfaction, but I do my best. I'm gonna do my best this time. So let's just crack open the Red Bull and commence to answering questions. Leastwise, I'm fixing to start commencing. Okay, first question is from BPAT427, and I think this one was asked before the last Q&A, and for some reason it's like I missed like 3 questions that were asked last time. So these are old questions. Hopefully he hasn't been satisfactorily answered by somebody else yet. So BPAT427 says, there's a subgenre of hardcore punk called beatdown, known for its ridiculously violent mosh pits. If everyone in the mosh pit is engaging in the violence completely voluntarily, there is no fear of getting hurt, and the whole pit and violent dance moves within it are a reaction to an extremely primal and hyper-masculine sound, as opposed to intentionally inflicting pain upon others. What would be the karmic impact of this? Question mark. I don't experience a desire to hurt others necessarily when I go to these kinds of concerts, but it's almost as if the music triggers a primitive part of me, and it feels as if I almost have to start swinging my arms and legs, which I assume is what others feel as well, hence why everyone is doing it. So the question embedded in this is, what is the karmic impact of flailing around in the mosh pit at a hardcore punk rock concert? That is the question. And he kind of answers the question to some degree by talking about like the extremely primitive or primal feel to what he's doing. And really, it is sort of like a regression to animalistic passions. Even if you have no intention of hurting anybody, still you're essentially raging like a wild animal, like a wild beast. And the more you do something, the more momentum that creates. You know, that's what karma is essentially, is just the momentum of your mental states. And so by doing this, I mean, you might not be making any unwholesome or unskillful karma by, deliberately hurting somebody, but still you've got this volitional animalism going on that is going to add more sort of violent, passionate, animalistic karma, which might be right up your alley for all I know, or it might not. But it's something that you would want to consider, I suppose, whether you want to have more animalistic karma that can result in animalistic results of that karma, fruition, animalistic fruition. So I think I answered it. I'm really not sure. I've never been in a mosh pit myself, but I've heard stories. A friend of mine in high school went to a punk rock concert. One band was called the Maggot Brains. They had like one drum set and 3 bass guitars and no lead guitar, and they were so awful that some of the audience rushed the stage and threw the singer off the stage, and he was on the floor getting his head kicked. But not all punk rock bands, or not all punk rock concerts are like this, I am sure. So I think I'll just move on to BPAT427's next question. This is a more recent one. Have you been running any drills with your Glock? What firearm would you like to purchase next? So I guess that's two questions. I haven't really been running any drills with my Glock. I did get a holster recently for my birthday. In fact, I got two holsters. This is one of them right here. It's very nice. Handmade by a proud Confederate down the road. Um, so the only drills, if you call them drills at present, is I'm just practicing just target shooting. It hasn't gotten any farther than target shooting. I'm not practicing quick draw or anything like that yet. I haven't even started really applying for the concealed carry permit when you got to go through some kind of training course in South Carolina. So that's about it. Just a bit of practice shooting, and I could use some improvement. I'm really not the best shot with a pistol. I used to be a really good shot with a rifle, but not so good with a pistol. And anyway, see, the next question here is, what firearm would you like to purchase next? I'm not really planning on becoming a collector. My father was a gun collector. I got a 22 rifle on the day I was born. He had something like 40 to 50 rifles and shotguns, just a few pistols. But what firearm would I like to purchase next? Maybe a pump shotgun, like a Mossberg or something. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't really given it much thought. Getting another firearm is not really high on my priority list right now. And as I say, I still need to practice with the one pistol that I've got. So I think I'll just move on to BPAT427's next question. And my answer to this one may be equally unsatisfactory, but such is life. He says, do you know of any reputable Theravada monasteries in eastern Washington, the Spokane area, that you could recommend to someone? Honestly, I don't know of any monasteries, reputable or otherwise, in the area of Spokane, Washington. I assume that at the very least there's some kind of Asian temples there. Maybe. I don't know what kind of immigrant community Spokane has. I've never been to Spokane. I was raised in Western Washington, but Spokane is way over by Idaho on the east. So, I mean, of reputable Theravada monasteries, there's supposedly one technically in eastern Washington, but it's down by the Oregon border, like on the banks of the Columbia River. That's in the Ajahn Chah tradition. And then there's one that was started by Ajahn Tanisaro like 10 years ago or a little less. I think it's in the North Cascades area somewhere. So they're both in Washington State, but they're quite a ways from Spokane. And also there's Birken in British Columbia, a little bit north of Vancouver, that is reputable. It's very reputable. But aside from that, I really can't recommend any monasteries, Theravada or otherwise, in Eastern Washington, because I really am unfamiliar with the monastery scene in Eastern Washington, or Idaho for that matter. So I think I'll just move on to the next question with all due respects. And see, BPAT's last question here is, have you done any traveling to other eastern U.S. states since relocating to South Carolina? Well, my sweetheart and I have made a couple trips to Virginia to pick up her mother when she came to visit us. So we've just taken road trips through parts of North Carolina and Tennessee and Virginia. I don't know if we hit any, no, I don't think we hit West Virginia at all. Although we are planning around the end of August to go on a trip to Ohio. We're going to take a road trip in a car with good gas mileage and drive up to Ohio, where my sweetheart was born, and where her mother still lives, and maybe ride in boats on Lake Erie or something. So yeah, we're going to hit all the states between here and Ohio, I suspect. So Yeah, I was never really heavily into traveling. I just really didn't much see the point of it when I was younger. And then around the time I became a monk, I just started traveling a lot. And just force of circumstance had me going to places I never thought I was ever going to go to, including Japan. Been to Japan 3 times. So yeah, I'm kind of um, I've been kind of a homeless wanderer for a long time, although those days I think are over. And I work full time, so I'm not having lots of time off for traveling. But I would like to visit Georgia, where my father was born and raised, um, northwestern Georgia, up around Mount Berry, Georgia. So that's kind of on the list of places to go to. So yeah, I think I answered that. That was an easy one. That was easy. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Alfred, and this one's kind of an interesting, spicy one maybe. When a person is in a lifelong relationship and your spouse is not interested in sex anymore, he's got sex capitalized, capital S. When your spouse is not interested in sex anymore, what would be the right approach? Resorting to masturbation or becoming celibate? Often, he sort of elaborated on this. Often, when you are in a relationship for a long time, some women shut up shop and leave you in the lurch, so to speak. If you want to clean your plumbing, it creates a problem. Well, from the Buddhist point of view, if you're able to be celibate, you should be celibate. I mean, um, there is a sutta where the Buddha says, if you can become a monk, become a monk. If you can't become a monk, then at the least avoid sex like you're avoiding falling into a deep hole with like red hot glowing embers at the bottom. And if even that's too much, at the very, very least, stay away from the wives of other men. So, yeah, masturbation is certainly preferable to just becoming a philanderer, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, if you just want to be like Orthodox Buddhist, um, yeah, celibacy would be preferable to spanking the puppy, so to speak. But I mean, it's just not for everybody. It's like some guys they just can't be celibate. It's like in the Bible, the New Testament, where Jesus says there are 3 kinds of eunuchs. You've got born eunuchs, made eunuchs, and those who become eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. And that's people who are voluntarily celibate for spiritual reasons. And then he says, but it's not for everybody, and it's really not. And I mean, sometimes if a person is celibate for spiritual reasons, they're like a starving man just fantasizing about food all the time. And I can relate to this. I've had this kind of experience where you're celibate, but you're just horny. You're just frustrated. So at some point you have to decide, are you making more good karma by being celibate and just being frustrated all the time, or would it be better just to relieve the frustration with some puppy petting? And I mean, for a monk, it's not a good choice to make. I mean, celibacy. I mean, if you don't want to be celibate, then you shouldn't be a monk, obviously. I mean, monks aren't even allowed to masturbate, at least not to orgasm. They might be allowed to jerk, but not jerk all the way off. So, I mean, one thing you could do is just try to persuade your mate um, in one way or another. I mean, I don't think getting angry and making threats and accusations is going to help anything. But I don't know. I think you could have some persuasive power. I mean, if she loves you, she might be willing to take one for the team, so to speak. That's maybe not a good way of saying it. But yeah, I mean, that would probably be first choice if possible. But maybe uh, the person asking the question here has already tried that multiple times, so he's falling back on something else. So, yeah, I mean, if it was me, unfortunately, it is not. Um, yeah, I think trying like romantic persuasion or something would be first choice. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a monk anymore, so um, resorting to your own right hand is, I mean, there's much worse things you could do, but be faithful at any rate. So I hope I answered that one. I don't want to wallow in it. I don't want to wallow in this one. Um, Not that it's a bad question or anything. I mean, it's probably applicable to a great many men. You know, so especially in the West, it's weird how it used to be if you wanted to have sex with a woman, um, I mean, you'd resort to a prostitute or some floozy in a bar, or else you'd get married. And it was like traditionally, women would have sex after marriage, but not before, or very little before. Whereas now it's like the opposite in America or in the West. Women have sex more before they get married. So, I mean, quite a few married men have made comments to this effect um, with regard to, I mean, like in communications with me, it's like, just if you want to be celibate, just get married. But yeah. So that is kind of a weird situation in the West that women will have sex more before they get married, and then after they get married, it's like, well, I don't have to do that anymore. In fact, I heard a joke today. It's like, why are women always smiling in their wedding pictures? It's because they're happy because they don't have to give oral sex anymore. It's just not fair. So, I think I'll just move on to the next question. I'll just sort of sneak away from that question. And the next question is from Robert. And Robert says, for a long time, I had this theory that the universe is just God split into trillion individual consciousnesses. So when you suffer, it's really God suffering, and when you're happy, it's really God who's happy. In that scenario, there is no real you and me, but only God who alone has consciousness, a sort of pantheism, God experiencing itself through us. Any thoughts on that? Um, yeah, I mean, some religions do teach that, like Vedanta teaches that, I mean, we have a soul or an Atman, but everybody shares the same one, and it's essentially God. But there is, I think, from a Buddhist point of view, obviously there is no God, so this would just be academic. But yeah, I can understand how you could say that, you know, ultimate reality is just infinite formless consciousness. But the thing is, if it's formless consciousness, then all the happy and the unhappy would be an illusion because they would be forms supposedly existing in the formlessness, but it's really just like a virtual existence. It's sort of like in Buddhism, you've got dependent co-arising paticca samuppada, which Nagarjuna claimed to be the same as emptiness, which means there is no ultimate reality to like a multiple phenomenal world. So the happy and the unhappy, uh, God, I mean, ultimately, the happiness and the unhappiness would be an illusion, but God would contain the illusion. So it'd be like um, maybe like a book containing a description of happiness or unhappiness, but ultimately, there's no happiness or unhappiness there. It's just these symbols that are represented or interpreted as happiness and unhappiness. So, I mean, if you want to reify ultimate reality as infinite formless consciousness, which Vedanta does, and I think quite a few Christian mystics also have done, then still, whether God is experiencing happiness or unhappiness as something real um, is debatable, and in a way, it kind of does because the phenomenal world is sort of kind of conditionally real. It's not just total absolute unreal because it has to be based on something. But yeah, it's going back to like the simile of the block of marble, where you got this one block of stone, which it's not near anything else, so we can say that it's essentially sizeless. And inside that block of stone is every single possible statue. And so you can have like joyous statues or statues of beings that supposedly are joyful, others that are sad, the dying Gaul or something. And I mean, it's just sort of not really. I mean, every single molecule in each statue is already there. You just have to dismiss the extraneous rock. But still, to say whether there's like, happy people and unhappy people, or happy anything or unhappy anything inside the rock is, it's just sort of an enigma or something. And I would say that ultimately it's not real, the happiness and the unhappiness, unless you get to like the ultimate happiness of nirvana, or the satchitananda of the Hindus, where just God is in the state of just total bliss, no problems, no worries, that kind of thing. And this also, I think, was a question that I somehow overlooked last time, as was Alfred's question. And I think this next one also might be one that it was on minds.com. It wasn't in the usual place for people asking questions. And so before I do one of these Q's and A's, I just go through all the usual places where the questions are asked, underneath in the comments under the videos, and the Discord server, and my Subscribe Star page. And I compile the list. And sometimes if questions are asked in unusual places, or they're asked very late, just right around the time I'm doing the video, then I don't see them. So anyway, this question is similar, and it's asked by Priapistic Monk. And Priapistic Monk says, in your opinion, after all that you have done, accomplished, and have obviously become, what makes a monk? With mutual respect, of course. What makes a monk? That is the question. And I mean, I can only speak from experience with regard to Theravada. So what makes a bhikkhu, maybe, would be the question I'll answer. And I mean, technically speaking, a monk, or like a bhikkhu, a Theravada Buddhist monk, is someone who is qualified to go through a 20-minute long ordination ceremony, and has gone through that 20-minute ordination ceremony, and has not done anything to excommunicate himself, or just hasn't dropped out, hasn't declared his weakness and dropped out. And technically, I mean, that's what a bhikkhu is. There's a chapter in the Dhammapada about the bhikkhu, which it kind of redefines the term. Like in early Buddhism, the Buddha would, in the text of early Buddhism, the Buddha would redefine certain terms like Brahman. He just defined it as a genuinely holy person, not just someone who was born into the Brahmin caste. Or, let's see, what other ones? He redefined a number of terms. And I mean, he kind of did that to bhikkhu also. Or then again, in the Buddha's own time, he would just say, come monk, ehi bhikkhu. And that would be it. I mean, the person would be ordained. So there was no 20-minute ceremony in the Buddha's time. So, I mean, if you want to be more sort of poetic or metaphysical or something, then I mean, a good monk, like you could say that a true monk is a good monk. And that would be, all of the things I said before, the person who's gone through the ordination ceremony and is, still in good standing and all that, and who is like sincerely, conscientiously trying to follow the instructions given in the Theravada Buddhist texts. He's trying to follow the rules and trying to meditate and, control his mind, or at least observe his mind and understand his mind. And yeah, I think that would be the answer to the question. So I'll just move on to the next one. And this is from Mary, spelled Merry. And this is kind of a tricky one, sort of like the is God happy or unhappy one up above. And it's, could you maybe describe what first jhana feels like? And this is kind of a tricky question, first of all, because jhana itself is somewhat controversial. Different meditation instructors, or let alone scholars who have never experienced it, but even meditation instructors who are some rather accomplished may not agree on exactly what is and is not jhana. And I have pointed out numerous times and have gotten some sort of disgruntled feedback over it, that most of what is considered jhana, not all of it, but most of what is considered jhana in Burma is, in my opinion, self-hypnosis. It's like a hypnotic trance. And a lot of Burmese meditation instructors are not sophisticated enough to tell the difference between hypnosis and jhana. And there is a difference, in my opinion. So first jhana, what it feels like. I mean, if I was a monk, I couldn't even answer this question, because monks aren't allowed to admit to having attained jhana to lay people or like in public, because technically jhana is considered to be a superhuman mental state. And this is suspicious to me because, for example, in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which is essentially the Bible for Vipassana meditators, or just monk or people who practice Vipassana meditation. And I'm not just talking about the Goenka method. I'm talking about like mindfulness meditation. It's like the Bible, and it defines samma samadhi, or right concentration, as the four jhanas. So it's kind of strange that right concentration would, I mean, you have to have a superhuman mental state in order to have right concentration. Although it is the last on the list of the Eightfold Path, and everything else culminates in this right concentration. So, I mean, maybe. But just going with the text, in first jhana, which is the first, like the lowest level of jhana, or absorption, it's called in English sometimes, you're still able to think. So you might still even be like labeling at this point, in breath, out breath, or touching, like the breath touching the nostrils as it goes in and out, that sort of thing. And what it would feel like is you're just like in a groove. Your mind isn't wandering anymore, and it feels good. You're just solid. And then it can even cause piti, or like a kind of pleasurable interest or enthusiasm to arise. And it just feels really good because your mind is like on point, and you can still have some kind of thinking action going on, but it's like meditative thinking. It's the thinking that is required to do that meditation. And when you get to second jhana, you stop thinking. But first jhana, you can still think. And so that's essentially what it would be. You're just in a groove. It feels good, especially if you're not used to it yet. I mean, if you're not used to it yet, I mean, you can just be like twitching and jerking. Your muscles will be like kind of spazzing out on you a little bit, just because, in my opinion, it's like your mind has got so much energy going, as a general rule. You've got this hyperactive mind that when you finally calm it down, it's the habitual energy doesn't have the usual avenues of expending themselves. And so they manifest themselves as like twitching muscles and so forth, or just the rushes of euphoria and so forth. But getting back to the question before I move on to the next one, what first jhana would feel like would essentially be just you're meditating really well. Your mind is not wandering. Maybe if it starts to wander, you catch it immediately, and you're just in this groove. You're just doing really well in your meditation. So I'll just go on to Mary's next question. And this one is entirely different. And now for something completely different. Are there many big spiders in Burma? I'm afraid of them and don't like them. Big spiders. Well, yeah, there are big spiders in Burma. But the most common big spider, I used to call them hand spiders sometimes, or wall clinger spiders. I mean, they weren't really as big as my hand. I got big hands, but they're pretty much all over. And they just stick to the wall, usually head down, and they just stay there and wait for something to come close, and then they'll zip out and get it. And they're like arch enemies with the little wall geckos. It's kind of sad. The wall geckos usually win, so you'll see this wall spider sticking to the wall. It might have like one leg on one side and two legs on the other side because the geckos keep biting their legs off. But when I first came to Burma, I first went to this uh, forest monastery in the wastelands, the blazing hot wastelands of central Burma. And I was put into this little cabin, and on the wall was one of these big spiders, and I didn't know what they were. You know, I knew it was a spider, but um, I didn't know if they were bitey or not bitey. And I could not sleep that night until I caught the spider. Of course, monks, good Buddhists isn't supposed to just squish them. So I'd have to catch it like in my alms bowl or something and let it go outside. But then I learned over the years that they are really completely harmless. I never really got bitten by one, despite the fact that they're ubiquitous. And the closest I ever got to being bitten by one of those wall clinger spiders was I was taking a shower, and the way people take showers in Burma is pretty much the same way people were taking showers in ancient India thousands of years ago, which is you've got a tank of water and you got this bowl and you just scoop the water up and pour it over your head. And one of those spiders was trying to get away from the flood by climbing up my leg. And I think it just took they're called the pedipalps, you know, like these two little short legs in the front that spiders have. Not the fangs, but on the outside of the fangs. It just kind of tried to dig in to keep from getting washed off my leg. That was the closest I ever gotten to being bitten by one. Although there are a kind of, I can't remember what they're called. I can't remember the Burmese name for them. But they're like a tarantula, like a small tarantula, and they apparently bite, but it's not really dangerous. It's sort of like a, I don't know, like a wasp sting or something, maybe. Probably not even that bad. Um, but spiders don't really bug me. Some spiders I even like like those wall clinger spiders. I just named them all Lloyd. They're all named Lloyd, and yeah, there's some kind of gross looking ones, like the ones that are camouflaged to look like bird crap. You know, they're kind of gray and mottled and spiky and ugly. I don't like that kind. But enough of spiders, I suppose. I mean, there's lots of spiders in Burma, but I've never really got bitten by one. I was stung by scorpions on several occasions, but never bitten by a spider. Bitten by ticks, which I guess are arachnids, but that's different too. So I'll just move on to Mary's next question. How dangerous is living in the forest in Burma in terms of tigers, snakes, spiders, etc.? Well, by far the most dangerous animal in the forest in Burma is not tigers, snakes, spiders, not even humans, who are often considered to be the deadliest animal in the forest, but it is the Anopheles mosquito, because they are vectors of malaria. And way, way more people die from the bite of the Anopheles mosquito than die from the bite of tigers or snakes or spiders. So, I mean, tigers are rare. I did live in a forest that had a few tigers, um, but I mean, they're pretty much afraid of people now because, you know, there's very few tigers left. I've when I was watching the Tiger King series, it was saying that there are more tame tigers in America, just privately owned, not even in zoos necessarily. That there are more tame tigers privately owned in the USA than there are wild tigers left in the world. So tigers have enough sense to just stay away from people. They figured that they're bad news. Snakes, yeah, snakes. I mean, there are poisonous snakes in Burma that are way more poisonous than snakes here. The most dangerous, deadly snake in Burma is not the most venomous. I tried to say venomous and poisonous at the same time. It's the Russell's viper, and they're just mean. That's why they're the deadliest. Is they'll actually chase after people sometimes. I got chased by a little baby one about this big. You know, it was coming at me like this, and it was just trying to scare me off. And of course, I'm not going to come closer to it when it's doing that. But yeah, there are quite a few Russell's vipers in central Burma, especially. I guess the deadliest snake in Burma is the many-banded crate. And you get bitten by a little baby one like this, you know, it just kind of nicks your finger a little bit and you're dead. I guess in the Vietnam War they were called the two-step snakes because you take it bites you and you take maybe 2 steps before you're dead. Maybe if it's a big one, but I almost stepped on a banded crate a few times. It wasn't the many banded crate; it was just the regular banded crate. Um, Saw a couple cobras, but I like snakes, so I'm not really afraid of them. I mean, you don't want to step on a viper, of course, so you have to be careful. But if you leave them alone, they leave you alone. That's pretty much the same with any kind of wild animal, unless you know it's some I don't know aged tiger that's just gotten used to eating people, or you know, you wander in between a mama bear and her cubs or some such. But as a general rule, if you leave animals alone, they'll leave you alone. Unless it's like mosquitoes or something, then they just come after you. So, how dangerous is living in the forest in Burma in terms of tigers, snakes, spiders, etc.? I was actually more afraid of wild pigs than I was of tigers when I was really like out in dense forest, just because there's more of them. You're much more likely to come across wild boars than across a tiger. And I've been told that you know they'll just you know charge up against you. You can get surrounded by a few of them, and they'll be biting your legs until you fall down, and then you're done for. But so when I'd be camping, just out in the middle of a forest under a tree or something, I'd always try to pick an easily climbable tree to camp under, or something along those lines, some kind of defensible position up on top of a rock or something. But again, I mean, the most dangerous animals in a tropical forest are the little ones that carry diseases, as a general rule. Plus snakes, I suppose. I was stung by scorpions several times, but it wasn't really a dangerous kind of scorpion. It would just hurt for a while, and then for a few days after that, I didn't know this at the time, but scorpions have a neurotoxin, sort of like a cobra, and so it just makes your finger go numb and all pins and needles. You know, if it stung your finger for a while. And there are some giant centipedes that are pretty gnarly too, but we don't need to dwell on giant centipedes. But those were ones I could not sleep. If one got into my cave, I was going to have to get rid of that centipede before I could sleep because they're so big. I mean, they're big as, you know, like over a foot long, and big as a baby snake, and they make this clicking sound when they run across the concrete floor. It's really creepy. And when they bite, I mean, it hurts. It hurts bad. Might not be deadly, but it's not good. So I think I'll just move on to Mary's next and last question. What is right livelihood for a layperson? Does it involve something more than keeping the 5 precepts? And yeah, it pretty much does. Usually when I do these Q's and A's, I don't like do a lot of homework. You know, I don't look it up, which maybe I should, but I'm trying to just you know, just rely on, you know, what I genuinely know instead of just looking it up and then, you know, looking smarter than I am and I don't know, trying to pass myself off as somebody who can answer every question. Uh, so right livelihood for a layperson. Somewhere in the texts, I don't even remember if it's a sutta or if it's in the commentarial tradition, but there is a list. I think it might be in the Visuddhimagga. There's a list of things that somebody who has right livelihood doesn't do. One thing, I mean, you're obviously not going to be killing anything. You're not going to be stealing anything. You're not going to be lying in your job. So that's, I mean, the first thing, your livelihood should not require you to break the 5 precepts. But then there are other things like You shouldn't be dealing in animals for slaughter, even though you're not killing them yourself. You shouldn't be selling them to somebody else where they're going to kill them. You shouldn't be dealing in slaves, and that would include like white slavery, so-called. You wouldn't be a pimp. You shouldn't be dealing intoxicants, which would mean no bartenders, no cocktail waitresses, and technically, even a grocery store clerk who's selling, or like a restaurant waiter or waitress who are just selling drinks, that would be that would not be right livelihood. You would not sell weapons or poisons, which also would hit the grocery store clerk who's selling the can of insecticide along with, the bread and the marshmallows and the gallon of milk and all that. And let's see, what else? Golly, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so you wouldn't be selling slaves. You wouldn't be selling, animals for slaughter. You wouldn't be killing anything yourself naturally. Like being a soldier, technically, that wouldn't be right livelihood, especially if you're like killing people. Um, Now, sorry to all you soldiers out there. I realize that you are necessary for society to survive in this state of civilization that we are in. But from the point of view of Buddhism, you are at best you're just sort of the tragic hero who has to sacrifice your own spiritual welfare so that others can live in peace. But I digress. No selling intoxicants, which of course rules out not only bartenders but mostly, you know, people, what are they called? Servers at restaurants and, grocery clerks and so forth. And golly, yeah, you have to be honest. So you might not make the best salesperson. If you're selling used cars, you know, yeah, it looks really nice. I mean, one of the cylinders doesn't fire, but it looks really nice. And then they'll just go somewhere else where they'll get lied to and tricked into buying the thing. So I'll just move on to the next question. I'm sorry I don't have the full list, but that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure I might have forgotten one or two, but I think you get the idea. You get a job that isn't not only not causing harm, but not promoting harm, not promoting the breaking of five precepts. You know, so it extends beyond just five precepts. Right livelihood does, and for a monk, it's right livelihood is a little different. You're not accepting money at all, and you're not giving Dhamma talks in exchange for something else. You're not bartering Dhamma for something else. You're not selling it, that kind of a thing. And you're accepting your alms while following the rules as conscientiously as you can, so that your livelihood of collecting alms into your bowl is right livelihood. But I think I'm getting beyond the question here because it was specifically about lay people. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Das Boot. And Das Boot says, if the madness of technocratic control wins in such a way that every transaction and every person on the planet is controlled directly, how will the tradition of retreating from the world survive? Well, I mean, genuinely retreating from the world and just becoming a hermit, that might still be possible unless you got like a chip implanted into your body and they're keeping track of you and it's like, nope, you're not being a good consumer. You got to come live in towns where we can keep an eye on you. But I mean, just going off the grid should still be a possibility until we really hit cyberpunk dystopia. And obviously, we are kind of moving in that direction, but directions can change. That's one reason why people predicting the future are so often wrong, is that people are not totally stupid. And even if they are heading for a brick wall, they do eventually swerve not to hit the brick wall. So you can extrapolate, oh, look, they're heading for that brick wall, so they're going to hit that brick wall. But then often just through seeming miracles, people grow a pair or whatever and avoid disaster, or at least a really bad disaster. So, but I'm just digressing here. Das Boot is asking, if the madness of technocratic control wins in such a way that every transaction, every person on the planet is controlled directly, how will the tradition of retreating from the world survive? Yeah, I mean, it would really have to get really draconian and just like really, I mean, even in communist China now, I assume it's possible for people to just go off the grid. If you're completely off the grid, I mean, not like the Unabomber or something, but if you're just really just minding your own business as a hermit, a recluse out in the wilderness somewhere, so long as you're not living in a wildlife refuge or something, not breaking some law, then, even a totalitarian repressive government, I mean, you're not posing any threat to them, and so they'll just ignore you. It costs more to deal with you than just to let you just live your life. So, yeah, I mean, it would have to get a lot worse than now before people weren't able to just opt out of society. But with regard to like the tradition of retreating from the world, like a monk, gosh, I mean, it's already pretty difficult now. Like in the West, in India, I assume that you could still do it. In Burma, you can still do it. In Buddhist countries, if you're in a Buddhist culture where people, know the score, the guy in the brown toga is actually a holy man, he's not just some weirdo, then yeah, it's still possible. But in the West, it seems to me that one of the biggest difficulties of like technocratic control, as Das Boot says it, is like socialism, where people are just getting used to the idea that poor people should just be taken care of by the government. It's not your own personal duty to help the poor or to put alms into a monk's bowl. A lot of people, like mostly lefties, I think, when I was a monk, would ask me, why don't you just go on food stamps? Why should people have to go through the trouble of putting food in your bowl every morning? Why don't you just, go to the food bank or something? And I did know a monk who lived in a wildlife refuge for a while and walked every morning to a soup kitchen, which is preferable to some government food distribution center. But still, yeah, the tradition of retreating from the world. And yeah, it is. The world is getting more um, invasive, or like government and just business, just society is becoming more invasive, where you can't make a stray off-color statement without possibly losing your job 10 years later because of it, or anything you do practically is being traced somehow. But going off the grid really does reduce that. I mean, I was almost a non-entity when I dropped out of the monkhood. I had zero credit rating, just zero driving record, zero pretty much anything. So you're invisible so long as you're off. You're like really opting out. So yeah, I think it's possible if society continues moving in a direction, imitating the Chinese Communist Party. If the West becomes like that also, then and then just gets like hyper technological so that they can just keep tabs on everybody, then possibly. But at present, I think the main trouble is just people just assuming that the government should just take care of monks because monks are just another kind of poor people. So I'll just move on to the next question, also from Das Boot. And Das Boot says, even now, it's hard for many to do a longer retreat if they are not embedded in a local traditional community or order, needing to organize visas, sponsors, and so on. Well, that's not even a question, is it? Oh, wait, maybe this next paragraph is the next part of it. Probably direct support from fellow Buddhists will become even more important, but I just wonder how the whole setup of retreating will look like if the most dystopian forebodings play out. Well, just improve your own karma, and you can dodge the bullet of the most dystopian forebodings. Because, I mean, this may not be Orthodox Buddhism, but it's my understanding that there are an infinite number of universes, and just our karma is sort of steering us blindly, like an autopilot, into one version of reality or another. So let's see. Yeah, I think this might all be part of the same question here. Gosh, this is kind of a confusing one for me. I hope you're not equally confused out there listening to this. See, even now, it's hard for many to do a longer retreat if they are not embedded in a local traditional community or order needing to organize visas, sponsors, and so on. Yeah, well, with regard to some meditation centers in Burma, yeah, if you don't have inside connections, um, then you're pretty much limited to the famous ones that um, cater to Westerners. You know, like Pa'ak to some degree, some of the Mahasi places, and Shui Umen would be the main ones, I think. So, I mean, it's pretty much always been that way. I mean, you have to rely on a society that supports that kind of a thing too. Probably direct support from fellow Buddhists will become even more important. But I just wonder how the whole setup of retreating will look like. Well, this retreat. In the first question, he's talking about the tradition of retreating from the world, and I assume that was just like renouncing the world. But then in the next two paragraphs here, it's talking about attending like meditation retreats. So that would be retreat also. It's kind of confusing to me now. I'm so confused. Let's see. Yeah, I mean it's always been that way, where you have to have a support system. It might just be the society at large. If it's a Buddhist society, then the entire population is virtually your support system. So yeah, I mean the only problem would be if the world is taken over by globalist, technocratic communists, and like they're totally secular, also total materialists. You have to believe in neo-Marxism, because all religions will be banned and so forth. Um, yeah, I think you're better off just not worrying too much about that. I don't think it's anywhere close to that yet. Although, I mean, the left is sort of facing in that direction, and some lefties really seem to think that we'd be better off with a government just controlling everything. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. After confusing myself and others, I'll just move on to the next question. This one's from Yuichiro. And this is a good question. I used to think about this a lot when I was a monk, especially. Yuichiro says, maybe you've answered this before, but is piracy theft? I don't think so, because piracy is just copying intellectual property, not depriving someone of something. For example, if you memorized a book and wrote it down and gave it to someone else, that could be considered piracy. What do you think? So this isn't like the pirates that go, "Arr, matey." Like the parrot, the peg leg and stuff. That's a different kind of piracy. And that's definitely like stealing, often killing. So you don't want to be that kind of pirate. Um, but is piracy theft? When I was a monk, I was really hesitant, like very hesitant, to copy books, because it would say right there on the copyright page, any copying of this book, and like I can't remember the whole spiel, but it's by electronic or other means, you must have permission from the author or the publisher. And I would actually have to get permission from the publisher, because it could be theft. And if you steal something, if a monk steals something, he's excommunicated. He's kicked out of the monkhood for the rest of his life. So I took it really seriously, because I didn't want to get excommunicated. Um, Later on, I started watching like pirated movies. Now there are these video sites. Some of them are called Putlocker. Various versions of it. I think maybe they're based in places like Russia, and they're online, and it's like apparently there's little statements underneath that it's really not illegal. The way there's some kind of loophole, sort of like torrent streaming kind of stuff where it's you're sort of exploiting a loophole in the law. And at least from the monk's point of view, um, in order to get excommunicated, it has to be illegal. It's, I mean, the way the rule is worded, which is Parajika number 2, I think. It has to be in such a way that you get hauled in front of a judge, and the judge would tell you what a stupid fool you are for having done that. So you'd have to do something bad enough to get chewed out by a judge for it, um, or if it's worth more than a coin called a pada. I've talked about that before. So it is. I mean, you're getting into like a gray area here. Um, yeah, it's if you're in doubt, don't do it. That would be my best advice. Yeah, if the example Yuichiro gives, if you memorized a book and wrote it down and gave it to somebody else, I don't think that would count as piracy. Like I've written down almost entire books, like as a monk, write them down into a notebook. I think if assuming that there is such a thing as rebirth and past lives, I think I was a kind of scribe. Like I wrote books, I copied books professionally back before the printing press got invented, because I'm very patient with that, and my handwriting is neat, and I can just write page after page. But again, I digress. Yeah, pirating books or movies. One thing is you have to have the intention of depriving somebody of something, and some people can say, "Well, you're depriving them of their royalties," in a way. So maybe you should talk to a lawyer and see if it really does count legally as theft. And some forms of it do, I'm pretty sure. Especially if you're copying something and selling it. That's really what they're after, I'm pretty sure. Because, I mean, nowadays you can just download like copyrighted videos off of YouTube and that sort of thing. And I mean, it's just, I don't think that would be illegal. But then if you turn around and you upload it and monetize it, you upload it again, somebody else's video, and monetize that, then I think YouTube just automatically spots that with their checking system now, and diverts the profits to the person who owns the copyright or who first posted it or something. But yeah, I really can't. I mean, this would be a very complicated answer, even assuming that I was really into like the whole all the legal technicalities, the permutations and everything. So yeah, just try to avoid breaking the law. And I mean, if you really do have the intention of just depriving somebody of their royalties or something, that would qualify. Because technically you do have to have the volition of depriving somebody of something in order for it to be theft in accordance with Buddhist ethics. Like for example, you see, something lying on the ground. If you think that it belongs to somebody else, you pick it up and walk away with it. It's a wallet or something. That would still be theft for a monk anyway. But if you are firmly convinced, or you think it's just very likely that whoever previously owned it had given up all claim to it, like maybe the wallet is, you find it under a rock. It looks like it's been there for 50 years. Then if you pick it up and walk away with it, all the money inside is from World War II era or something, then I think you wouldn't be stealing it unless you were taking it from somebody's property. You're out in the woods or something. So yeah, I guess all this talking that I'm doing is just sort of trying to compensate for the fact that I really don't know enough of the like copyright laws and that sort of thing to really answer the question. Although from the Buddhist ethical point of view, you do have to have the volition of stealing in order to really steal something. If you take something by accident, you don't have your glasses on, you just take the wrong bicycle or something, pick up the wrong cell phone that's the same model as yours, thinking that it's yours, you put it in your pocket, you're really not stealing anything because it was done in good faith. But I mean, if you know that you're pirating something, that's already you're kind of inching in the direction of stealing. So you got to be careful. And most monks, I think, especially like in the West, you know, they're really not so careful about infringing on copyright laws. If pirating really is theft, then I assume there are quite a few Western and Eastern monks who are just excommunicated without even realizing it because they watched the movie that was on one of these like illicit streaming sites or something, one of these Russian streaming sites like torrent sites or something. So yeah, I'm sorry, Yuichiro. I cannot answer your question precisely because I lack the knowledge of the whole legal mumbo jumbo. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Rafi46. And Rafi46 asks another good question that I have thought about. And Rafi46 says, you often hear the following stance on abortion from Buddhists online. Quote, this is the following stance. Quote, the traditional view is that sentience begins at conception and abortion is a violation of the first precept. When it comes to legal matters, I am pro-choice because criminalizing abortion only creates more problems and suffering. Making abortion illegal doesn't eliminate it. It only makes it more dangerous. Unquote. Is this a valid view in Buddhism? It's close to my view on abortion. I do think that, I mean, from traditional Theravada Buddhist point of view, life begins at conception. Science, biology says the same thing, unless, the hysterical neo-Marxists have completely subverted biology, like just classical biology. But the life of an organism begins when it's at the zygote stage, when the sperm and the egg come together. You've got this unique unicellular organism, which in the case of a human being is going to multiply until it's got trillions of cells, but it's still the same organism with the same genetic code and everything, the same genotype. So I can agree that, I mean, just because something is immoral doesn't mean that it should be illegal, and that's a slippery slope right there. If you want to just ban anything that's immoral, because people have differing views of what is immoral. Obviously, Christians, the fundamentalist Christians on the one side, and like the far radical lefties on the other side. I mean, they're not going to agree on a whole hell of a lot. Uh, with regard to what is or is not immoral. I mean, morality is almost just an obsolete term for the far left because I mean they may give it lip service, but they're quite willing to perpetrate just about any atrocity in many cases just to further their cause because it's the ends justify the means or some such. So I mean I can agree sort of. I don't agree with some of the last part making. Let's see. Criminalizing abortion only creates more problems and suffering. I don't think that is necessarily the case. Um, yeah, like what happened in America with Roe versus Wade being overturned by the Supreme Court. It just means that the individual states can decide whether abortion should be legal or not. And so, um, you know, a Democrat voting state shouldn't be too far away. That if you really want to get an abortion, um, you can just cross state lines, go somewhere where it's legal. And a lot of companies nowadays are even claiming that they will actually pay women to make the trip to a state where abortions are legal so they can get a safe abortion. Their body, their choice, supposedly, although technically the developing embryo is not their body. So is this a valid view of Buddhism? I think in Buddhism, you just don't want to do politics at all. I mean, you don't even take it as far as this quote takes it, where it's like, I think that abortion is wrong or unethical or more bad than good in most cases. So I'm just don't approve of it. But if whatever the insane society chooses, I mean, I'm not gonna lose any sleep over it. I think that would be more of a valid view in Buddhism. Taking the side of legalizing it, still, yeah, I think a good Buddhist could still follow this example that Rafi 46 gave. I mean, so long as you're just separating politics from morality, then it's like Buddhists can also say, killing is bad, but still, I mean, we have to have armed forces to protect the country. It's not like they're condoning killing, it's just they're acknowledging this like an ugly fact. And some people are especially, well, I don't know, I won't even say especially on the left, but some people, like if you make an ugly statement, just stating an ugly fact, they just assume that you want that to be true. Some ethnicity has a higher cognitive higher cognitive skills on average than some other ethnicity. You know, People will just accuse you of like wanting that to be true. It's like, you want that to be true. You're a racist. But I mean, you're just acknowledging empirical data. So, yeah, I think it's all in all, yeah, it's more or less of a valid view in Buddhism, depending on, your own attitude. Because really it's your own mental states that make something um, ethical or unethical, skillful or unskillful. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Toronto Nat. And Toronto Nat says, Jesus said that we will know them, meaning the value of spiritual teachings, by their fruits. Isn't this concerning when it comes to the dominance of leftism in Buddhist discourse? I mean, it's concerning, but not for the reason really that Toronto Nat seems to be implying. I mean, it's concerning because Buddhism has essentially been hijacked by the left in the West, and it pretty much has always been um, dominated by the left with regard to Western Buddhists. You know, Asian immigrant Buddhists can be still be conservative and everything. They're just almost completely separate from Western Buddhists, unless it's traditionalist Western Buddhists who are being ordained into Eastern traditions and so forth. But monks are very different from Western monks are very different from Western lay people as a general rule. So it is concerning that Buddhism among Westerners has been hijacked by the left and by a left that is going more and more and more insane. Up until around 2015, it was relatively harmless, but it's really just Buddhism is just being redefined and distorted and mutated and fucked over and fucked up until, I mean, you can hardly even say it's Buddhism anymore. But then it's um, like some people on the left, I'm sorry to be picking on the left so much, but it's like they can't define the word woman. You know, Democrat politicians just refuse to define the word woman, or else they'll use this circular, invalid definition of a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, which you're using the word to be defined in the definition itself, which is bad practice. And I mean, you can say the same thing about Buddhists in the West now. A Buddhist is anyone who considers himself to be a Buddhist. Anyone who identifies as a Buddhist is a Buddhist, regardless of what they believe. And that's becoming more and more the politically correct view with regard even to Theravada Buddhism, not just Buddhism in general. So you've got people who are so-called authorities on Theravada Buddhism who are just really concerned with, say, queer theory in Theravada Buddhism, or they're just hell bent on having like ethnically representative sanghas, which is kind of strange considering that most sanghas are overwhelmingly East Asian and South Asian, but they think that there's not enough representation of brown people in Western sanghas because they just pretty much ignore the existence of all the immigrant Asian sanghas. So getting back to Toronto Nat's question, yeah, the fruits, you know them by their fruits. I mean, no pun intended, I assume. Yeah, it's like they're just taking the ball and running with it. They're just taking something established so that it's easier to, um, you know, sort of be famous with it, to have influence with it. You know, they don't want to just start their own religion, which would be just ridiculously absurd anyway. So they just take Buddhism or whatever the religion is. They've pretty much made attempts at all of them, pretty sure, and just redefine it and just turn it into, you know, Buddhism flavored or whatever flavored cultural Marxism, emancipatory politics, and so forth, which is nonsense. It's not even really Theravada anymore. So it's not really turning Theravada into something bad. It's just they're just turning Theravada into something that isn't Theravada anymore. So it's not really that Theravada is going bad. It's just they're just kind of destroying it in a sense, turning it into, like I say, Buddhism flavored political correctness, psychobabble stuff. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Rob, alias Dama Farmer. And this is kind of a strange question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how nice was your birthday cake? What kind of a question is that? It's a difficult one for me because it seems to me, this is my theory on cakes, once you get up to a certain level of niceness, it just levels off. So I'm not sure I would even call it a nicest cake at 10. I mean, it was a really nice cake. It was totally deluxe. My sweetheart said it was the best birthday cake she ever ate. And it was good. It was definitely good. Custom made. So yeah, rating cakes is really not my forte, but yeah, we can call it a 9.8 on a logarithmic scale, I guess. I'll just move on to Rob, alias Donald Farmer's next question here. Please give an update on the career move now you're destined to be a fat, pencil-armed office dweller. Well, I don't think I'm going to become fat or pencil-armed. And the career move, I mean, I was offered a promotion of moving from the back where the sheet metal stuff is being made to the front where it's being sold. And so I would make more money, considerably more money, and I'd be sitting in an air-conditioned room in a comfy chair, and I wouldn't be just drenching in sweat all day, and I wouldn't come home as exhausted. But still, I'm going to have to start working out or something. I'm going to have to get some weights or something and make sure that I don't become fat and pencil armed, as Rob, alias Dama Farmer, has put it here. So it's still in the future. I still have to take some kind of test, and it's just, yeah, I'm not exactly sure when it's going to happen. It might be a few months down the road before I actually stop running the machines and driving the forklifts and sit up front and sell things for commissions. So I'll just move on to the next question. I mean, I was warned this was going to happen, that I was going to get promoted, but we'll see how it goes. I'm not complaining either. If anyone associated with me at work sees this, I mean, I'm really not complaining. I mean, I'm willing to take the job. I was offered the job. I wasn't just ordered to take it. So it's all good. So the next question is from Erain. And Erain says, explain the Buddhist life stages you mentioned. And that was like a personal conversation between me and Erain. And I was telling her that in Theravada Buddhism, and I don't remember if it's in a sutta or if it's just in the commentarial tradition, like the Visuddhimagga or something, that the different decades of a human life are divided up by their predominant quality. And it goes all the way up to 100, but I've forgotten most of the last ones because it's we'll get to that. The first decade, from 0 to 10, is like the puerile, the helpless, babyish decade where you're not fully developed yet. You're still just sort of like a tadpole. And then the second decade, from 10 to 20, is the decade of play. And then the third, from 20 to 30, is the decade of beauty. And then the next, from 30 to 40, is the decade of strength. And then from 40 to 50 is the decade of wisdom. And then 50 to 60, you've reached the midpoint from 0 to 100, and that's called the decade of decline. And after 60, I don't even remember what they're called, but it's just getting worse and worse until you're finally, it's sort of like Shakespeare. I don't remember which play where he's talking about the different stages of life. And it's at the end according to the Buddhist version, you're bent over like a roof beam, or not a roof beam, but there was some sort of bent. It could have been like a sapling that was bent like this to make a kind of building, like a Quonset hut, kind of an early Quonset hut type of building. But it's talking about how your back is just completely curved over, and you're like going blind and deaf and everything. It just gets worse and worse after you hit 50, according to this scale. So now that I'm 59, I really don't follow that one very much. I mean, when I was 40 to 50, that was my decade of wisdom. So I hope I haven't completely lost that. So that's the best that I can remember, and I don't even remember the source. It's in Theravada Buddhist tradition, but maybe it's the Visuddhimagga. I'm not sure. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Arya Akuma. And Arya Akuma asks, what makes one an ascetic? And that's a good question. I think an ascetic would be someone who, if they're not averse to comfort, they're just indifferent towards comfort. I think that would be a fairly good definition. Or you could even say that even if a person likes comfort, but they just avoid it for spiritual reasons, that also would make an ascetic. But the whole thing is pleasure and comfort that some people, and I've been like this, I think my father was like this too. I mean, you have a certain appreciation for comfort, but at the same time, it's sort of like eating lots of ice cream or something where, too much of it just makes you like soft and weak, doughy, out of shape. And again, it's sort of like the the protagonist in the movie Apocalypse Now. Towards the beginning, he's saying that if he's not on a mission, he just feels like he's just degenerating, getting softer and weaker. And so there is some of that in the ascetic mindset, unless you're just indoctrinated into a religion where it says you got to be an ascetic or you're going to go to hell. Or if you want to be liberated, you must be an ascetic, and they'll just do it for that reason. Um, but yeah, it's a certain appreciation for discomfort, not necessarily pain. I mean, Buddhism, you're not supposed to be out trying to hurt yourself. You're not cultivating pain, like trying to get, scorpions to sting you or something. But you just follow the middle path between, the original middle path in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha's first sermon according to tradition. You avoid the two extremes. One is sensual pleasure and one is just self-torment. Self-indulgence and self-torture. You follow the middle path. And I mean, the middle path in ancient India would just be considered complete self-torture by modern or postmodern standards, where you're just literally wandering around homeless and penniless and begging for your food in the streets and wearing rags and so forth. I mean, that was the middle path. Now, it's fairly ascetic. I mean, the early Buddhists were definitely ascetics, although they were accused of being wimps, like shaven-headed householders, by even more extreme ascetics, like the Jains and the Ajivakas in ancient India. Because, I mean, Buddhist monks were allowed to use sandals. They were allowed to wear sandals. They were allowed to use a walking stick, which were just considered, just luxuries that are just leading you to hell by these more extreme ascetics. But yeah, I think voluntary discomfort would be the the criterion for what is it? The diagnostic trait of an ascetic is someone who endures voluntary discomfort. So I'll just move on to the next question. This one is from IZ. And IZ says, when you try to describe Nibbana as a kind of primordial consciousness or a marble block, isn't that trying to reify the unreifiable? There was a sutta where Venerable Sariputta warned against going too far and trying to grasp the ungraspable with the conceptual tools that we have. I just cannot quite remember its name or number. Also, Nibbana is included in the list of papanchad or papanchaable things in Majjhima Nikaya number 1. Wouldn't it be more prudent to refrain from trying to see or describe the nature and basis of Nibbana and describe it in merely soteriological and non-samsara terms as the Buddha did? Well, I mean, if you're going to talk about anything, you have to reify it. You've got to label it. You got to turn it into an it, which is already reifying it. So even the Buddha would reify Nibbana of necessity, at least grammatically, when he'd be talking about it, because once it's an it, it's already reified. So there is that. I mean, it's just the limitations of human language. You have to reify anything you talk about. One thing here that I don't quite agree with is Nibbana is included in the list of papanchad or papanchaable things in the Majjhima Nikaya. I mean, you can turn it into papancha once you've named it, once you're referring to it as it. Although one of the many synonyms for Nibbana is nipapancha, which just means without papancha. That's what Nibbana is. It's once you have gone beyond papancha, which is like diversification. It's like setting up a multiple world of various real entities. That's papancha, or just dividing things up between this and that could be considered papancha. So Nibbana doesn't have any division of this and that. So, I mean, I could just refuse to talk about Nibbana because once you talk about it, you have to reify it to some degree. And people ask questions about it, and I'm trying to explain it in such a way that, I mean, it's like the raft in the suttas where it's just in a text, the Alagad Upama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, which is a very good sutta to read. The Buddha compares Buddhism to a raft made out of rubbish. Man walks to a riverbank, and the river is flooded, and he needs to cross the river. There's no bridge, there's no ferry, and so he just looks around at all the sticks and vines and grass and so forth, and he just ties it all together into a kind of float, and he holds onto it, and is kicking his legs and getting to the other side. And once he gets to the other side, he lets it go. He doesn't continue carrying it on his head. He'll just drag it up on the bank and beach it and leave it there, or else he'll just push it back out in the water and let it float away. And that's what Dhamma is. That's what Buddhism is. It's just this convenient contraption made of rubbish that gets you liberated. It gets you, to the other shore. You cross the flood of samsara, and then, I mean, it's because it's not ultimately valid. You let go of it. You don't need it anymore. It's just a way of getting to the other side. And once you're at the other side, you don't need it anymore. So, I mean, it's all kind of rubbish if you think about it. But again, I mean, if I'm going to be answering questions about Nibbana or about ultimate reality, I mean, you have to reify it to some degree with a proviso that no amount of thinking about it is really going to get you to understand it. I like the idea that words, like the words of a Zen master, this is a Zen saying, or like the Zen master is like a master archer who can shoot down other arrows in flight. He sees an arrow, he can shoot it down with another arrow. And thus you use words and thoughts, concepts, in order to shoot down other words and thoughts and concepts. It's like this idea hits against that idea and they just both fall to the ground. So it still requires a certain amount of reification in talking about what ultimately cannot be validly expressed in words. But so long as I'm like hitting up against other people's beliefs, kind of weakening their reification of Nibbana or reality in one way, even though I'm using another way of doing it. It's called skillful means, especially in Mahayana. So I'm doing the best I can. Next question is from Caveman. And Caveman asked, thoughts on open individualism? Question mark. And then I didn't know what open individualism was, so I asked him if he could clarify. And then Caveman said, in contrast to closed individualism, which asserts that conscious experiences are bounded or closed off by personal identity, open individualism is the idea that all conscious experience is experienced by the same self. So the only difference between my past experiences in this life and the experiences of any other being at any other time is that I can remember my past experience, but all experience, oh, I can remember my past experience, but all experiences are still mine. I've heard that the Buddha was an empty individualist. You only exist for a single moment. All other moments are experienced by different selves. But I don't know if that reflects his view accurately. In my opinion, empty individualism implies open individualism, since they are both opposed to closed individualism. The whole issue just revolves around what exactly the self is and how experiences can belong to oneself but not another. Well, I would point out here, towards the middle of this, he said, I've heard that the Buddha was an empty individualist. You can only exist for a single moment. All their moments are experienced by different selves. Yeah, I would say that that is not an accurate statement because, I mean, the Buddha didn't say that your self exists for only one moment. I mean, he said you just don't have one. There is no self. And this is based, according to my understanding, ultimately on Paticca Samuppada or dependent co-arising, which is saying that everything in this phenomenal universe, and Hegel unfortunately had a similar idea. I think Kant was kind of going in this direction also, but everything that exists, this multiple universe, what the Taoists call the 10,000 things, is it's virtual. I mean, it's not like completely, absolutely non-existent, but it's conditional. If this exists, that exists. If this ceases, that ceases. And this is also conditioned by other things. So you've got this web of conditions, everything mutually conditioning everything else, and nothing has an inherent self-existence. And so to seem like we exist as individuals, it's conditional and like virtual, um, but it's not ultimately real. So we don't have a self even for one moment. It's not like the self is changing from one moment to the next with no connections in between. It's just that no matter how connected it seems, ultimately the self, I mean, it's fine to talk about it from within a samsaric context, but once you get out of the box of this entire samsaric system, it's just meaningless and invalid. So with regard to open individualism, um, there can be the appearance of open individualism. You can say that empirically, from a samsaric point of view, it's more valid than closed individualism. Um, yeah, so that would mean, if I understand this correctly, in closed individualism, there wouldn't be any rebirth. Otherwise, you'd have to remember, what happened in your past lives, which usually is not the case. So I think that's what he's hitting on here is that in order for rebirth to really be valid, you'd have to have, I mean, you couldn't have closed individualism where, it's like who I am is just limited by this one lifetime. Um, but this whole lifetime is itself kind of conditional and virtual and not ultimately real. It's like we're in a simulation. So you could say that a simulated open individualism fits the matrix we're in better than a simulated closed individualism, but ultimately it is a kind of simulation. I mean, it's not totally false, It's not like a total pure illusion, but still it's conditional on all these other conditions that are also conditional, so that you don't have any solid ground. You don't have any nucleus of ultimate reality that everything is based on, other than just the background of reality that is formless and infinite and non-differentiated. So I'll just hope that that made some semblance of sense, and I'll move on to Chaplin. And Chaplin says, this is a weird one. It's easy, I guess, but it's weird. What is your favorite insect and native mammal in South Carolina so far? Well, I was going to say the wild turkeys, but it's a little known fact. A wild turkey is not an insect. So let's see. My favorite South Carolina insect, I guess it'd have to be the fireflies. Like late spring and early summer, they're just like flying around in the yard at dusk, like flashing off and on. It's really nice. My dad called them lightning bugs, so I call them that too sometimes. So I guess my favorite South Carolina insect is the lightning bug, and my favorite native mammal, South Carolina. I don't see a whole lot of wildlife other than wild turkeys and groundhogs, and of course like squirrels and things. I haven't done any really good like hiking or camping yet. That was like one of the first things I wanted to do when I got here, was to hike Paris Mountain, and we're living like practically in the shadow of Paris Mountain right now, and it's a state park all over the top of it with hiking trails and everything. And I still haven't hiked it. So maybe after Humble Stature moves to Greenville in a few weeks, maybe he'll go hiking with me. And after I get the white collar job, before I've lost all strength, I can go. I won't be as exhausted after work, and maybe I can work something out. So short hike anyway. Short hikes, plural. So my favorite native mammal, I guess it'd be the groundhogs, because they just don't have them on the West Coast where I lived. It was kind of interesting. The first time I saw one, it was a roadkill. I didn't know what it was at first, but it's like a marmot. It's like a big ground squirrel, but they get big, sort of along the lines of a wombat. So I guess that would be my favorite South Carolina mammal, except for Genghis, who's my dog. Maybe I should include Genghis, my dog. He's my favorite mammal in South Carolina, and he's a problem child, but he's like an innocent child of nature. He's just beyond good and evil. So that's Chaplin's first question. And Chaplin's second question is the last question of this video. The very last question. It's kind of a naughty question too. Chaplin asks, have you ever had your IQ formally tested? And if so, what was the result? And modesty forbids. I was tested formally. I did take an IQ test when I was a teenager. And it might be lower now due to all the substance abuse as a teenager, mainly, and cooking my brain with malaria like 7 or 8 times in Burma, and just getting older. But I did have my IQ formally tested, and I'm just too damn modest to tell you what the actual number was. Let's just say it was above 140. And yeah, I pity the fool who think I am not modest. So that's it, and that's the last question. And again, if you are interested at all, anything you want to know, just feel free to ask, and be sure to look at the URL links below. If you haven't subscribed or liked the video yet, go ahead and subscribe and smash that like button. As they say, I am becoming a salesman soon, so I'll just have to start the crazy hype stuff and wearing funny costumes and so forth. And that's pretty much it. So until next time, be happy.